What's up, everybody? Welcome back into 2 on OSU. Wow. Cowboys got down 14 points against Houston, come back to win, huge victory. Everything's on the table for them. They're now 8-3, 6-2 in the conference. A lot of tiebreakers, a lot of game action to discuss, and that's why I bring in my identical twin and beat reporter, Sam Hutchens. Sam, we're going to talk about all of it. But first, we want to thank some of the ad sponsors who help keep our show running. And we want to thank two fellas movers, MidFirst Bank, the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum, Oklahoma Ford Dealers, and FireLakeJobs.com for supporting our show. And we also remind everybody to drive into your best in Oklahoma Ford dealers today for the best deals on Ford's full lineup of trucks and SUVs. Ford is the best in Oklahoma. Sam, I laid it out for you. Here the Cowboys are at this incredible opportunity at the doorstep. How have they gotten here?
Yeah, that win against the Houston Cougars certainly makes this game against the BYU Cougars much more important, or at least intriguing. We should say up front, a win does not guarantee Oklahoma State a spot in the Big 12 championship game yet. It may on Saturday. That depends what Texas does against Texas Tech. And the thing that made me laugh was the Big 12 releasing all the tiebreaker scenarios. And at the end of the press release, they said pretty much, hey, if Tech beats Texas, then there's still too many scenarios to include in one sort of in one release here. So check back with us, because it really is a mess. But things will be much simpler if Texas beats Tech. That would ensure the Cowboys are winning in. But yeah, Ben, this team, the 23 team, has a chance to win a trophy that the 2011 team never did. 2011 team, there wasn't a Big 12 championship game at that point. This year's Cowboys team could win a trophy that the 21 team didn't win, with that vaunted defense with NFL guys everywhere, because that 21 team lost to Baylor in the Big 12 championship game. So this team's fascinating, because you're right. At first glance, it's like, what is special about this team? What has gotten this team there? And Ben, I think we've settled on a variety of things that have come together for this Cowboy team. Good play, good luck at times, a good schedule, and enough of those things have cobbled together where the Cowboys are in the mix to win a trophy that has never been won before in Oklahoma State history. It's pretty crazy.
I know, and the internet meme popular right now, I find really funny, is the Vince McMahon. He was special. You know, like when you think of the 2011 OSU team, the offense is what got that team to, you know, the great highs that they reached. And then in 2021, you think of the defense. But as you said, Sam, this 2023 OSU team has a chance to do something those teams didn't. And I don't know if they have the incredible offense of 2011 or the incredible defense of 2021. I think the adaptability is really the thing that stands out to me as the special quality for this OSU team. And I'm not saying they're better than those other teams, but the adaptability with changing the offensive running scheme, 4 games into this one, going into the season with a 3-3-5 defensive front, that was a sign of adaptability. That's kind of the thing that stands out to me on how this Oklahoma State team got to this point.
Yeah, Ben, I agree with you. I think if you put this 23 team in a time machine and send them back to 2021, I think the 2021 team wins pretty handily. And if you send this team back to 2011, I think Brandon Weeden and Justin Blackmon put up a pretty big number on this team. And I'm not sure this year's Cowboys teams would beat either of those two teams. But you're right. The reason that this team, with the win against BYU and some other things going right for them, has a chance to win a trophy that the other two teams never won, I put it down to winning the games they had to. This Cowboys team is probably not as good as those two teams we just mentioned, but this team, for its big blowouts that it's incurred, it beat Kansas State, beat Kansas, beat OU. Sure, all those games were at home, and all those games were pretty tight, but the Cowboys won those games that really mattered, and they've done just enough to get into a special position right here, to quote you and Vince McMahon a little bit. Here's something fascinating. I look at the point differential of those teams as we compared kind of the two past legendary special teams in OSU's history, 21 and 2011, to this team. I'll take you through a stat, Ben. This is a little journey to put these three teams in context. This year's team lost 33-7 to South Alabama and 45-3 against UCF. For comparison, in 2021, the biggest loss that team took all season was 5 points to Baylor. And the biggest loss the 2011 team took, the only loss that 2011 team took, was in double overtime at Iowa State, which was a 6-point loss, 37-31. So the interesting thing about this team, the current Cowboys, they're more prone to blowouts, as we've seen. They can get blown out at times, and maybe not even by a top 5 team in the country. The two teams that have blown them out have been South Alabama and UCF. But what this team does, if it's prone to blowouts, it's also good at winning tight games, at grinding teams down late, at getting Ollie Gordon the ball late, and grinding down Oklahoma, grinding down Kansas State, grinding down Kansas, winning those tight games. So this team will not be super impressive with the point differential or anything else, but what it has is it's able to win close games in football late. We saw it last week in Houston. Cowboys needed to grind away the game late after a little comeback, and they didn't get behind too much. They gave it to Gordon late, and he bled the clock out. So it's fascinating that this team has a chance to do something that those two past teams have never done for the Cowboys, because I don't think it's as good, but it's almost as good or better at winning the important close football games that any team has to win a championship.
I think the mental makeup of this team has got to be pretty strong. You look at the cards they were dealt, with all those transfers leaving on the defensive end, your quarterback leaves. I mean, that can mentally shake a locker room, a team. A whole new set of leaders comes in, a whole new identity is found, and this Cowboy team has certainly been strong mentally. They've had the blowouts, as you mentioned, Sam, but I think the resiliency that this team showed getting down 14 points against Houston. After that safety, where Ollie Gordon got tackled in the end zone, and OSU had to punt the ball to Houston with like 3 minutes left. Houston's getting the ball out of halftime. Gosh, I thought that was really a time, a pivotal moment where this team could have kind of crumbled. And instead, you look at that 4-minute stretch before the half, where it not only saved the game, I think it kind of saved their season. So their mental makeup to me is incredibly impressive.
Yeah, I put in my post-game story from Houston that was the lowest point of the game for the Cowboys. And it felt like that was a turning point to, is this going to be another UCF, or are the Cowboys going to turn it around, pull the plane up from the nosedive, whatever analogy you want to use. And it turned out that wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back. So yeah, that was impressive. And really been just the whole mental makeup of this team. Week 1, this team was completely different. Mike Gundy would tell you they didn't know how to run the ball in week 1. This team mid-season changed its whole running scheme. This team changed its quarterback. And that's not to mention in the offseason, changing into a 3-3-5 defense and, all these changes with all these new faces. It's been pretty incredible, the turnaround that this team has showed to really look so much different from its week 1 version that really was not very good. I don't think either you or I were impressed with the Central Arkansas performance or what they did in Tempe, Arizona, even before the South Alabama. There were signs that this team was maybe going to struggle. And now this team, like we said in the opening, a chance to do something that no Oklahoma State team's ever done, which is pretty incredible, the turnaround. And I guess a lot of that is, if you can't point to, well, they have Justin Blackmon, or hey, Malcolm Rodriguez is going crazy. Maybe you point to with this team, the mental fortitude. And that's been certainly one of this team's biggest strengths.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up. Not really thinking after week 3 or against South Alabama or Central Arkansas that this team really could find that next gear. There were no signs that offered that. Mike Gundy brought it up again today, Sam, in the press conference on Monday. He said, look, 2021 was kind of that same way. Nobody would have predicted that we would have gone to the Fiesta Bowl and had that great of a season in the Big 12 championship. Remember that 2021 season? There was a loss against Missouri State or not a loss, but
No.
a game where OSU could have easily lost. Jason Shelley and the Missouri State Bears were
Yes.
driving down to win the game, and they would have gone for 2.
That's a good pull. They would have gone for 2. That's right. First game of the year. Almost lost in Boone Pickens.
Yeah. In that season, nobody would have thought after that game that this team had any sort of chance to do something really special. So maybe that's a trend we can point to as a little doubt. Maybe you have to reinvent yourself along the way to find such success late in the season. And there's one last thing I wanted to bring up that Mike said today, Sam. He said, look, I mean, when we were down 14 points and punting the ball away in that moment, all I was expecting to do was look up and see some rain and think, here we go again. Here's UCF again. So I still don't know how the Cowboys did it. It came down to a pass getting thrown right to Trey Rucker. That really turned the tide in this one.
And that was crazy because that was Donovan Smith had been playing out of his mind, honestly, to that point. And that throw was just a little reality check, like, whoa, that's his first bad play, and it was a huge point in that game. But yeah, Ben, it's crazy. This team is 8th in the Big 12 in points scored and 9th in the Big 12 in points allowed. And yet, with Texas at the top, the Cowboys are in the driver's seat right now to reach Arlington, to get to a Big 12 championship game, not with just middle of the pack statistically, offenses and defenses. So this is a fascinating team to have been covering, and that's why I think that this team has been on such a roller coaster, unlike any other. In 2011, so much of it was just highs, and in 2021, it was all pretty much highs once that team got going. This team has had the highs and lows really unprecedented in an Oklahoma State team that has a chance to win a Big 12 title late. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Another Big 12 team that has had a little bit of some roller coaster this year is BYU. And it's mostly been on the low end of that roller coaster. The Cougars are last in the Big 12, Sam. 22.1 points per game. And they're 12th in the Big 12 out of 14 teams in defense. So not great figures there for the Cougars in their first year in the Big 12. They're 2-6 in conference play. Wins came against Texas Tech and Cincy at home. So they're looking for their first road win. But Sam, the Cougars looked pretty good against OU last week. It took a interception return, a pick six to beat them. What do you think about what Mike Gundy said about the Cougars today and what fans can expect from them?
Yeah, they're an option team, which maybe scares you if you're this late in the season and you haven't played an option team before. But the Cowboys have, even Donovan Smith last week, a quarterback running the ball so much. And then certainly with KU, they're kind of a true option team a little bit like BYU. So the Cowboys have dealt with this sort of challenge defensively before. And yeah, if you look at the stats overall, BYU, man, they don't really scare you. The stats, I looked it up. In BYU's 6 losses, like you said, they've beaten Texas Tech and Cincy, and both of those wins were at home. But in BYU's 6 losses, most of which were on the road in the Big 12, the Cougars are being outscored 230-88. So when the Cougars have had to go on the road and when they played Big 12 teams that they could not beat, it hasn't even been close a lot of these times. So I guess a lot of that is the Cougars, they run an option offense where you're running a lot. Maybe you're not built to come from behind anyway, but that's been the Cougars' problem, is they've just gotten behind, and it's been bad, except for last week against OU. I thought the Cougars played one of their better games of the year, maybe their best game of the year considering the opponent at home in Provo, but I don't know. I imagine that's more of a fluke. I think the Cowboys, pretty deservedly, pretty heavy favorites in this one.
Yeah. And defensively, Sam, the Cougars based out of a 4-man front. What's interesting and what folks need to know is they play a lot of man coverage. So guys like Brandon Presley immediately come to mind. And that's something I want to get into. He had 15 catches last game in Houston, one shy of an all-time record set in 1949 by Alex Lloyd. But Sam, the way Oklahoma State used Brandon Presley with the motions, a lot of times he would start out in the slot, get kind of a running start horizontally, and then at the snap, he'd have a lot of different ways to get into that. I think that's another example of the way OSU has continued to kind of reinvent itself this season. And look, against a lot of man coverage, I expect Brendan Presley to have another big day.
Yeah, I can see that happening. The Cowboys are going to get some guys back. It sounded like in the press conference. I have a story up on that. I wrote that on Monday. Cowboys are going to get some guys back. Blaine Green could be back. Gundy said he mentioned him, but he really threw out Jaden Bray, who had that big touchdown in the first half against Houston on that fade route and made a really good play, but he only played about 15 snaps. But Bray will be back too. So the Cowboys, wide receivers against man coverage, Cowboys are getting some guys back to beat that. So yeah, that could be big. And like we talked about, BYU's defense is not well, or is not great anyway. So I think the Cowboys, as long as the Cowboys can keep the turnover margin close and avoid crazy plays that swing the game, I think the Cowboys in a neutral game script can really just grind the Cougars out.
I'm going to say something that is going to sound super weird coming out of my mouth. Are you ready?
Okay.
Oklahoma State kind of has some depth at wide receiver.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, with the guys you mentioned, it cropped up again in 2021. And gosh, it feels like the spring game Cowboys keep, getting receivers dinged up. And it's been a while since they've had a full stable of receivers. And I'm not saying it's full at this time with Stribling and Shetron, done, not playing, but the Cowboys have enough options at this point late in the season where you feel comfortable with their depth, which is certainly an advantage, of course, in games, but also in practice. I mean, Mike Gundy said practice was hard without wide receivers able to play a lot. And I think that's going to be important, especially going into these final 1, potentially 2, 3 games.
Yeah, and BYU's strategy, Gundy indicated this much in his press conference. BYU will bring a safety down to stop Ollie Gordon, just like pretty much has been every Big 12 opponent's plan since that Iowa State game. Alan Bowman's told me this. He's like, yeah, when you watch Oklahoma State on film, number one priority, whoever's leaving that film room is going to think we got to stop number 0. So that's where it starts again. And heck, in the first half, like Houston, they did pretty much stop number 0. And it worked out really well in that first half for Houston. They just couldn't keep it up. So we'll see how that. I have it written down. What did Gordon have in that second half against Houston? 150. Well, 21 rush yards in the first half, and then 153 total. So that was the half disparity there. If the Cowboys can avoid a bad start, I think they'll be at least positioning themselves to beat BYU and keep in the Big 12 championship mix. And it may or may not be a clinching victory by then. That just depends what happens around the conference.
In the spirit of this week, the thing Mike Gundy said he's most thankful for, aside from his health, is the fact that the Cowboys learned to run block. He said he was most thankful that the Cowboys finally figured out how to run block. You wrote about Ollie Gordon after the game, Sam, and I mean, it felt like the Cowboys kind of got back to the recipe that got them on the 5-game winning streak in that second half with Ollie Gordon. Tell us about what you kind of saw with Ollie and in his return to form, and also what you maybe gathered from the boot he was wearing on his right foot.
Yeah, well, you could tell it just felt good for Gordon to be back because Orlando was not pretty. And, of course, I have rarely seen him without a huge smile on his face, but man, he was, even with an ankle boot on his right foot, post-game in the tunnels of the Houston Stadium, man, he was smiling and ear to ear, just so joyed and praising his teammates. But yeah, you could tell that getting back on track meant a lot to him, and now he's tied as the nation's leading rusher. Ben, I think you had that stat, so we'll see how that fares with 1 or potentially 2 or potentially 3 games left for the Cowboys. But yeah, he said that he'd be fine, and I haven't heard anything to the contrary on that in terms of Gordon injury going forward. He said he just got like whiplashed a little bit, kind of a weird tackle at the end of the second quarter. But he said, if I have a game tomorrow, I'll be ready to play. So he said that Saturday night, probably just as a joke. Got to hit the ice bath first, I assume. But I imagine Gordon will be about as full strength as you can get for the last week of a regular season in a Big 12 running back. There's no way his body feels great overall, but nothing that'll keep him off the field.
Yeah, it's interesting. Mike Gundy said he still wants Gordon practicing hard. He said with running backs, and he's been around plenty of them, that's kind of how they're wired, I guess, is you have to continue to keep banging around in practice. You got to keep playing physically, so it translates well on the field. So that's something to certainly keep our eye on. I'm thinking now we'll get into our score predictions, and then finally the 2-minute drill, closing with that. Hats off to us, Sam. We both said the Cowboys were going to win, relatively comfortably in Houston. They did win by 2 scores. I wouldn't call it comfortably.
Yeah, if you watched the game, you would not say they won comfortably.
No.
If you were fishing and then checked the game on your phone, you'd say, they won pretty comfortably. But we watched the game. I don't think we thought the Cowboys won comfortably. But maybe if your only contact with the outside world is 2 on OSU, you thought that they won comfortably.
And we love those people whose only contact with the outside world is 2 on OSU.
That'd be a rough life.
We really appreciate those listeners for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't know, Sam. My gut is telling me that this game is going to be close. I think the weather in Stillwater is going to feel more like Provo than it will Stillwater.
Yeah, it'll be cold, maybe a little rainy, but it'll be cold.
And look, I mean, Big 12 championship is probably going to be on the line if things shake out like we think they're going to shake out on Friday night. I think the Cowboys are going to win, but this is going to be even less comfortable than in Houston. I'm going to take the Cowboys 30-28. I think it's going to be a really close game.
Alex Hale field goal or something for the win, or defensive stand? What do you got? 30-28.
Yeah, I think the defense will win this one for him. I think a Nick Martin sack might finish it off.
Okay. Now, I understand why you think maybe a little closer. I think it truly will be one of those games that maybe feels a little closer than it is, and the Cowboys pull away late. I'll go something like 38-27. Oklahoma State wins. And I don't know. This team looked completely different 2 weeks ago versus 1 week, and they've looked completely different, in Bedlam week versus a bunch of other weeks. So it's tough to predict with this team. You've been better at it than I in this whole prediction game, but I'll join you. Cowboys beat BYU.
It's just tough to have a huge amount of confidence, I think, with the last four halves of football. Oklahoma State's played 3 poor halves of football and 1 good half of football in its last 4 games. So,
and this team's not designed really to blow teams out. Mm-hmm. They put a butt whooping on Cincinnati. They did that, but for the most part, Cowboys wins have been close fourth quarter games where they've made the plays or gotten the breaks and done whatever else, or gotten the no calls in the case of Bedlam to win those games. But this team's just not designed to blow teams out, and we've seen that time and time again. So I agree. Yeah, I think it'll be closer than maybe a 25-point game that you'd think from a potential Big 12 champion against a bottom of the barrel BYU Big 12 team.
All right, Sam, we'll get into the 2-minute drill. The Cowboys will beat BYU if the turnover margin is just close. I'm not saying they have to win it, but that's the turnover margin is the thing that can shake games on its head and give teams that aren't as good a serious shot, even in away games. So if the Cowboys can just keep the turnover margin close, within 1 or 2 even, I'd like the Cowboys to win. I think the Cowboys are going to beat BYU if Brennan Presley has 10 catches. He doesn't need to get to 15. He doesn't need to nearly break another record. He just needs 10 catches. I think with the way the Cowboys have been using him, he's going to be a really effective piece, especially against this man coverage that the Cougars like to play. And then our second question, we wrap it up, Sam. Of course, BYU's first time playing OSU in at least a long time. I mean, I can't remember the last time they've played. What comes to mind when I ask what you think of the BYU Cougars?
Jimmer Fredette comes to mind off the top of my head. That was a fun era of college basketball, which was an absolute blast. I don't know. Remember, Ben, when you did that story asking Wisconsin people before the guaranteed rate game, what comes to mind when you think of Oklahoma State? A lot of people chose basketball references. I don't know. For me, maybe basketball sticks in my head a little more than football. But I'd say Jimmer Fredette. That's the BYU athlete I associate the most. I know others would probably say Steve Young or something, but I'm of the era, man. Jimmer Fredette mania was something else back in the day.
Yeah, Steve Young didn't have the Twitter talk that Jimmer had going for sure.
Is he still on the Sharks? Shanghai Sharks?
Yeah, I checked. He dropped 60 the other night.
Probably. No need to fact check that. That's probably true.
Yeah, it's a recurring statement. I think of the mountains. I'm kind of bummed that BYU and OSU are going to play in the first matchup isn't in the shadow of the mountains. It looked like the OU people, the OU contingent who went out to Provo last week, really enjoyed that, and they're awesome. So baseball, football, not basketball. Sorry, Jimmer, but a lot of sports you get to play. That's a really unique backdrop in that city, and that's kind of what I think of when I think of the BYU Cougars.
Well, that'll do it for us here on 2 on OSU. We wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. Hopefully you're spending that with friends and family and staying warm and watching some football. That's a really great Thanksgiving plan as far as we're concerned. And thanks to all of our sponsors. Hey, the people that really are the stars of the show, Sellout Crowd producers, all of them. Jacquelyn Musgrove, Michael Martin behind the scenes, Michael Lane making the graphics. I know you've been and I are very thankful for those people who help bring 2 on OSU to you. And we're also thankful for folks who like or subscribe or really, I've said it before, click any button. Disagree with us vehemently in our comments. I think that helps us too in the algorithm. So I guess algorithms can't read, but we appreciate whatever you do interacting with the show. And only episode of the week, so we'll be back maybe previewing a Big 12 championship game, maybe previewing a disappointing end of the Cowboys season next week.